Good morning, everybody. I hope you're there. I was just taking a little slurp of tea, and we are talking this morning about developing personal resilience, really tools and strategies to help build your strength and resilience in day-to-day life. So I've got a slide deck we're going to go through, and I will just move us on to our aim today. We've got 45 minutes or so. Hope to empower you to improve your existing resilience. Don't forget you do already have it. We're also going to look at hopefully deepening your current understanding of what resilience means, how it impacts your personal and professional life, and then actually how to make it a little bit stronger. So we're going to work through some of this. I thoroughly enjoy this particular topic, so I'm trying to keep on point and to time, but I can tend to get carried away because I just find it so interesting. Confidentiality, there will be Q&As at the end, so we don't record the Q&As, although this first part is recorded. Please respect the views of everyone else in those Q&As, should you want to pop them up there. And as I say, I will try and answer as many as I can at the end. And just to reconfirm, this session is recorded, will be made available to the Fire and Rescue Service later on once we've edited various bits and made sure that we're adhering to the confidentiality limits. So, without further ado, I'm going to look very briefly at what resilience is, why it's important, what challenges us, our beliefs and assumptions around it. And then probably the most interesting part is about strategies that we can use to help develop it and improve upon it. And also, I particularly like the ladder of inference, and we'll run through as much of that as we've got time for in that latter section. So I picked this definition from the American Psychological Association because it's quite neat. It's the process of adapting in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, etc. I sort of view it as bouncing back. Bit like if you've got a tennis ball which is very, very cold, it might shatter, but when it's warm and okay, it bounces back. And it's that bounce back when things come at us in life. So keep that in mind as we run through this. When we're talking about that bouncing back, in a sense, our resilience, if we are resilient, it can be around viewing difficulties as challenges. It can be around looking at failures as mistakes that we can build on and opportunities to learn and develop. Taking responsibilities for those and finding solutions. And also having some self-awareness around how our own beliefs may influence our ability to be resilient. I think one of the things that I was talking about with somebody around this was, rather than a heads down sort of view, it feels more like a heads up view when we've got some resilience to hand. So we're facing the world and we're being a bit more positive around that. And if we look at a positive psychology view, that can be around looking at those challenges as opportunities for learn or adaptation and change. A resilient person may commit to goals, or is more likely to commit to goals. They might be long-term or very short-term, but that ongoing sense of achievement and sort of ticking things off a to-do list. The resilient person often has a positive outlook. And again, I talk about that heads up sort of view rather than heads down. And they tend to look or focus on what they can control in a situation rather than what they can't control. Now, the word resilience is quite often used in organisation and management terms about an organisation being resilient, able to adapt, to move, to shift, to change within a framework. Let's look at ourselves. Let's look at our resilience. Let's look at how we view mistakes, how we view challenges, how we view goals, and what that means for us. So please keep that in mind as we go through this webinar this morning, the focus on yourself and your own awareness. Okay, so what's going to test that bounce back? What's going to make it tricky? What's going to lower our resilience? Stress, either in your personal life, your work life, or perhaps both, can impact that resilience and bring it down, make us less flexible. Sleep, especially poor sleep, so like a bedtime routine, shift work, if we're not getting enough quality sleep, then that can have an impact on our cognitive functioning, our ability to make decisions, and obviously my ability to speak properly. Ill health, long-term conditions. At the moment, and we're now in spring, the sun is shining today down here anyway, lifts the spirit. But actually, if you're going through winter and it's fairly miserable, that can have an impact on mood. Anyone who's experienced COVID or family who's experienced COVID, there may be long-term conditions with that. Those sorts of things can really have an impact on our ability to bounce back. We may also have going life events or situational life events. The pandemic, which the World Health Organization recently said was now manageable. I can't remember the correct terminology, but that going through all our lives will have had an impact. Relationship breakdown, bereavement, a family member perhaps who's been diagnosed with dementia, for example, that then brings a different adaptation necessary to cope with that. We also might have financial worries currently, family worries. All those sorts of things can impact how we view how we're doing, and that resilience can actually become less and less. There may also be something about our own personality, our own beliefs and attitudes and our choices, which can have an underlying impact on where we sit with this term resilience, this bouncing back and adaptation. Which links me very nicely into my next slide around that beliefs and assumptions. My background as a psychotherapist, I've worked with this quite a lot, and I find this fascinating. If we have the ability to look at ourselves, it may be that our own thoughts and belief systems actually hijack our resilience before we even realise. So some things to think about with this. How strongly do you believe you have control over situations and experiences that affect your life? So there can be an internal view that we feel we can manage things, we can cope with things, we can adapt. So we have some level of internal control. It may be that we view that external influences have more control. So there's much more, around luck or fate, around that success or failure. Okay. What they suggest, they being evidence-based research, etc., is that those individuals who feel that they have more internal control believe that success or failure is based on their own efforts. and they therefore can change things. They have choices. Now, ordinarily, we are all somewhere on a continuum. And what I want to do is show you this, what they call this locus of control continuum. And again, I quite like this diagram, partly because visually it sort of quite succinctly shows us the opposite ends of the spectrum. So, for example, externally, they, whoever they are, control my destiny and how my life is going to unfold. When we have a very strong internal control system, I control my destiny, and the outcomes that I get are determined by my actions. So they're polar opposites of that continuum. Now, ordinarily, we will be somewhere fluidly on that line. And the other interesting thing I find with this is to a certain extent, say, a work environment will be in a different position on that line compared to a home environment. Now, sometimes our assumption is that home environment we have more control, and work environment we may have less, but it's not always the case. Certainly in my work, and if we're talking about our headspace, we may feel that we have a lot of control in work because there's a framework which we understand, we know our job description, hopefully, and there's a framework within the organisation where we can manage. With the home environment, there may be more fluidity. It may be that you have to consider a lot of other people in decision making, so you may feel you do not have quite so much control. So it's worth thinking where you are on that line in different situations, because that may give you some awareness of your underlying beliefs and where you sit on that level. Okay, I think one of the things, and again, COVID was with us for a very long time, felt like a very long time, and different people's work environment was changed dramatically. We could not control that wider context, but what we could perhaps control, and I say perhaps because if working in a blue light service was different to the norm, whatever the norm was. But it is suggested that actually we couldn't control the wider context, but we may have been able to control how we in individual situations kept ourselves safe. So, for example, wearing a mask when you're going shopping, washing your hands, not having lots of visitors at home, and so on. So there may have been an ability, again, depending on that line, to have less control or more control, which actually made us feel better about the situation. And I'm using COVID as an example loosely because I am very aware that everyone's situation was different, but we may have been able to control some of our life differently to the wider context. Okay. So let's look at some strategies and just drop these in. Eat well and take regular exercise seems obvious. However, how many of us, when we're feeling a bit low, jump for the chocolate biscuits, the crisps, the alcoholic beverage at the end of a working day, and sit down and just take a big inhale, exhale, and stop? All that lovely stuff in the moment gives us a reward, but long term, it actually doesn't help our physiology to keep on track. The same with exercise. There's loads of evidence to show that actually being active, taking some form of regular exercise, actually helps your overall mental well-being. So it's worth looking at how you're eating and how you're being active. Realistic and achievable goals. Okay, not necessarily smart, but but in a sense, even if it's something as simple as, okay, I'm going to have breakfast at the same time every morning, and I'm going to choose what I have for breakfast. That can set you up for the day. It can make you feel more positive. You've chosen a goal and you've stuck to it. But even small everyday wins can make a difference to how you feel and how your brain wires around being a positively outlooking and that resilience level. So quick, easy wins. Look at where you do have control and where you don't. And again, I'm not talking about the big stuff, because in a sense, this is about practicing, enhancing your resilience and developing it. So again, start small, sustainable, and work upwards. Okay. And so some of these suggestions I'm going to make might sound a bit trivial, but actually if you keep at it, it does work. So if, for example, with the controller, and I've got a list here, so I'm looking downwards. Can you control what sandwich you make for lunch? Can you control what salad you have for lunch? Can you control whether you stop having caffeine about 3 or 4 hours before bedtime at least? Can you control what you wear? Okay. Look around what you do already control in your life, acknowledge it, and then do something else on top of that. Okay. It just enhances that acknowledgement and awareness of what you can manage, and then you can build on that. Okay. There's also something I find interesting about this self-care. I won't say we all tend to have a critical voice somewhere in our head, but we often have somewhere in the back of our mind a voice that says, oh, making a mistake isn't very good, is it? You'll get told off. Let's see if, rather than looking at things as a mistake, they're a learning opportunity. Try to quieten that critical voice in your head and be a little less judgmental of yourself. How many of us have self-talk that we wouldn't speak to a friend the way we speak to ourselves? So just think about how critical you are of yourself and how you could perhaps adjust that, again, in small increments. Okay, give yourself a break. You are awesome. But sometimes we just drop the ball, but we can still be awesome. Okay. Self-compassion. Tricky because it sounds a bit soft and woolly. But even giving yourself the opportunity to think kindly of yourself, and again, quieten that critical voice, can make a real difference. And this last one, I've met so many people in the fire and rescue services who will go above and beyond to help somebody else, but are rubbish about asking for help. So give somebody a gift and ask an appropriate person you can trust, or person you can trust to do that particular thing, for help. It's extraordinarily rewarding to be asked to help somebody and to be able to supply that help. Because for us, it can make us feel trusted. It gives us meaning, purpose. So asking somebody else is not a weakness. You're actually giving somebody a really important gift. So think about some of those as ways that you can develop that resilience. I'm coming on to this ladder of inference, and I want to spend a little bit of time on this. It can be a really useful tool in working through situations or thought processes where you've got yourself into a thought pattern or a behavior pattern that's actually unhelpful. Okay, or perhaps you can question. So I want to go through this in a little bit of detail. And I'm starting to lean into the screen. I'm not quite sure why, but again, I find this fascinating. So I'm gonna run through this. Ordinarily, we will be in a situation, and the jargon is you'll have a pool of observable data. And what we tend to do is work up this ladder. So from that observable data, those observations, we will select some of the data, not all of it. Okay. We then add meaning to what we've selected. That is based, we will then make an assumption based on that meaning. Okay. So we've got data, we've selected something, we add a meaning, we're then going to jump to some assumptions. From that, we jump to a conclusion. We hit a belief based on our conclusions. And then the next step is to actually look at the action we take based on those beliefs. We then come back down. Okay, so just think about those steps in the ladder as you go through. Data, we'll only select some of it. Meaning, we then jump to an assumption, jump to a conclusion, we adopt some beliefs, and then we act on it. Okay, that can happen super fast without you even thinking about it. So what I want to now do is take this and use an example to run through it. Okay, so we've got the observable data. It might be what we hear, what we see, what we say, information, experience. We're trying to understand and interpret the data. What does it mean to me, and how does it make me feel? Okay, so think about those two. What can I conclude from it? How am I going to use that information? And does it affect what I think or believe? We try and question. We try and question those, and we're going to try with some self-awareness, hopefully, or with some solution thinking. We're going to try and adopt a new way of thinking and act on your beliefs of the reality in events. Now, this is snapshot. So if you do have questions about any of this, please put them in the chat function and I will run through them at the end as long as we've got time. So if we're using this and we're sort of using an example of a work situation. So I've delivered a report on time and I've got some feedback on the report. So my observable data is the feedback on the report. Okay. I'm trying to understand the data. He, she, they have suggested I've missed something. Okay. So I'm making meaning from it. Critical voice may be there. I think I'm being lectured. Pointy finger lecturing. The conclusion I draw will be he, she, or they think they're better than me. My assumption may be they think they're right and I'm wrong. So my belief that I'm going to adopt, and this might be linked in again to my underlying beliefs, is actually nothing I do will be good enough. Never going to ask for feedback again. Why bother? And that will happen in nanosecond. So how could I work that differently? How could I be with that and use my self-awareness and understanding of this ladder differently? So let's check our process. Why do we choose that course of action? And is there anything else I could consider? Okay. What belief of mine led to that? And actually, does it have a basis? Why did I come to that conclusion? What was I assuming? Was I selective about the data I chose? And why was I selective? We tend to think and pick up on the negatives because they cause us more worry. So was I only picking up on negatives? Was there 95% positive feedback where I've picked up on 5%? So again, check what are the real facts that I could or should be using. So let's try and rework that again. So we started off with the observable data, which I've got some feedback on the report, and that is the observable data. My original thought and understanding was he suggested I've missed something. Okay. However, if I just take a moment, could I look and say, actually, it was pretty good, but I've just missed a couple of small details. Again, if we look at meaning, I was being lectured. Not having that. But if I take a slightly different view and stand back and look at the observable data differently, okay, if I've missed a small detail, next time I'll look for it. So actually the feedback's been really useful. The conclusion that I originally had, if I'm now looking at an alternative view, okay, they're being a bit picky, but is that going to help me focus in the future on doing a really on-point job? Or was it really necessary? Was that me? Probably not. Okay. So the assumption, again, is it, could the alternative view be actually that I just need to reread and check for the typos next time a little bit more carefully, give it one more glance? Could my belief be, well, actually, if I look at the job overall, I'm doing pretty good. Good enough. It's okay. And that gives us a different action about maybe asking for feedback next time. And again, continuing to work in a positive way. So you can see how that bottom rung on the ladder can give us, when we select the data with no self-awareness, very different outcome and a very different way we feel about it. The lettering in the red here can feel quite anxious, angry, stiff. If we're looking at the phrasing in green on the other side there, that can feel much more fluid, easier to sit with, but it is a tricky, difficult, challenging way to think, but it is worth giving it a go. That ladder I've used a lot, and I found it really successful way of taking it step by step and understanding something differently. And quite often, if we're not able to do it in the moment and we take it away and have a look at it, actually that can help us process the information we've got and then how we look at the situation. So it's really worth using and giving that a go. So I think, to be honest, this has been a very quick snapshot, an amuse-bouche, if you will, of the full-length workshop around resilience. Okay, I'm hoping I've touched enough to give you an awareness of what it means to be resilient for yourself. I hope, and my aim was to give you some understanding of how being more or less resilient can impact on your personal and professional life. And again, I acknowledge in the fire and rescue services that there's a blend between the two. One doesn't stop and then the other begins. Okay. What I'm also hoping is that with the little hints and tips list and with that ladder of inference, the locus of control, you've got some tools that you could maybe reflect and use around looking at improving your resilience, developing it, and maybe something that in the future you can use to alter the way you view things a little bit and just enough to shift it. Okay, I've sort of come to the end of this. I have to admit, I've been clock watching because I'm terrible at timekeeping ordinarily with this topic. I've left myself some time for Q&As now at this end of it, so I'll check those. So if any of you do have any questions you want to ask, please pop them in the chat function. And if I don't have any, I may, well, and I'll just look at the chat, come up with a couple that I have been asked in the past, just to give you a flavour of some of the things that have come to light. One of the things that I've been asked quite a lot is how on earth can I change my beliefs and my almost default thought processes, because it's the way I'm made. Apart from having a lengthy philosophical discussion around how we're made and how we formulate our original beliefs and understanding, this self-awareness and having an awareness of who we are and how our life has shaped us can be really useful in looking at how we can take our adaptability, stroke the resilience of where we are now, and moving it forward. I talk about the critical voice that we quite often have in the back of our head. There's also value in thinking about perhaps some adult, mentor, peer, colleague who inspires you, sports person, whatever it is, who inspires you, and see how they manage their resilience, how they manage to achieve this positive outlook a lot of the time. One of the other comments that I've had quite often is that I don't have a choice. I have to do this. And we have to go to work, we have to pay the bills, etc. But there are ways we can manage our thinking around that and manage our life around it. Also, with some decisions, there is an element that if you only feel you have two choices, and I can't remember the quote well enough, if you feel you only have two choices, then you're definitely missing one, if not two. If we allow ourselves to think a little more broadly, there can quite often be alternatives to what we have seen as only two things. So I really do hope that this has given you a little bit of a taster this morning on resilience. And should you wish to check out any other information that we've got, please go and have a look at our website. We also have a My Firefighters Charity app that you can log into and sign up for. And we have loads of information of resources, tools, hints and tips that you can support yourself with. And if you do that on your smartphone, you can carry us around in your pocket, a whole team of support in your pocket. I hope you found that interesting. As I say, this recording will be available later without some of the Q&A bit there at the end. And I hope you have a really good day. Thank you for coming. Bye.